Good evening. I'm Alan Solomon. I'm the Dean of the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's forum with the United States Senator from Maine, Susan Collins. I want to thank President Monaco for being here, and more importantly, for all the support he provides to Tisch College and to the value of civic engagement here at Tufts University. Before we begin, I also want to thank my Tisch colleagues for their hard work on this event. And I want to acknowledge tonight's co-sponsors, the Department of Political Science, the Tufts Republicans, and Tufts Civic, which is a student organization that seeks to foster bipartisan political dialogue. Tisch College and Tufts University share that objective. And the Distinguished Speaker Series is one way we nurture a campus culture of respectful, informed debate by which we bridge differences and treat ideological diversity not as a weakness, but as a strength. 2 weeks ago, at an earlier distinguished speaker event, former Vice President Al Gore said, I'm not just here to inform or entertain you. I'm here to recruit you. Tisch College also wants to recruit you. Whether you feel compelled to combat climate change, promote racial justice, fight economic inequality, or grapple with any other of the intractable problems that challenge our world, we'd like to help you engage with diverse communities, to work with others to solve problems, and to help you repair the damage to our civic and democratic institutions. By offering learning experiences to Tufts students through academic courses and internships, by conducting research on civic education and political participation, and by designing innovative programs and partnerships that allow us to apply knowledge to effect change, we proudly play a role on this campus and around the country in advancing the power of young people to do good. But it is no secret these days that when people think about the avenues and institutions that lead to positive social change, the Congress of the United States is not the first one that comes to mind. The divisiveness and dysfunction in today's politics has seriously eroded the public's confidence in their lawmakers. According to the most recent poll, congressional job approval stands at around 16%, and in some years it has sunk to as low as 9%. As frustrated as we may be, we cannot disengage from the goings-on in Washington or on Capitol Hill, where our leaders are charting the nation's future on vital issues like immigration, healthcare, and tax reform. On these and other matters, tonight's guest has been one of the leading voices in the United States Senate for more than 2 decades. Susan Collins is the senior United States Senator from Maine, a seat to which she was first elected in 1996. Collins was born to a political family. Both of her parents served as the mayor of her hometown of Caribou, Maine, and her father served in both houses of the Maine legislature. Her interest in politics was further sparked in high school when she visited Washington, D.C. as part of the Senate Youth Program. She had the opportunity to meet then Senator Margaret Chase Smith, the first woman ever to represent Maine in the United States Congress. Senator Collins now holds the very same Senate seat once held by Margaret Chase Smith. After graduating from St. Lawrence University in New York, the senator worked in government both in her home state and in the nation's capital. She eventually joined the cabinet of then-Governor of Maine, John McKiernan Jr., as Commissioner of the Department of Professional and Financial Regulation. In 1992, she was appointed New England Regional Director of the Small Business Administration by President George H.W. Bush, and the following year, she worked in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as Deputy Treasurer. In 1994, she became the first woman nominated by a major political party to run for governor of Maine, and she lost a tough three-way race to her future Senate colleague, Angus King. But 2 years later, she was elected to the United States Senate, and she has won re-election 3 times. She is now the 15th most senior member of the United States Senate and the most senior of the 5 female Republican senators. Senator Collins has been described as one of the last survivors of a once common species of moderate Northeastern Republicans. And in 2015, she was ranked the most bipartisan member of the United States Senate. She is also She also is one of the hardest working legislators in the country, and she demonstrated that this afternoon in the incredible briefing she had received. But in more than 20 years in office, she has not missed a single vote in the Senate, having cast 6,400 votes in a row. On many of these votes, she has shown a willingness to buck her own party and not just work with Democrats, but vote with them. During the Obama administration, she was the primary Republican sponsor of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And last year, she joined with Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand to introduce a bipartisan amendment to protect transgender service members from President Trump's plan to ban them from our military. She was also one of just 2 Republican senators to oppose a bill that would allow states to defund Planned Parenthood, and last month she voted against the bill to ban abortion after 20 weeks. Because her party knows that it cannot take her vote for granted, and because Democrats know she's a potential ally across the aisle, Senator Collins wields enormous influence in the United States Senate. We're fortunate that she's able to join us this week at a time when she is leading efforts to negotiate a bipartisan bill on immigration, an issue that has already shut down the government twice this year. We're honored to host Senator Collins in Medford 3 years after she honored our medical students as the graduation speaker for the Tufts University School of Medicine's main track. This partnership between Tufts Medical School and the senator's home state plays a pivotal role in decreasing barriers to medical education for low-income students from Maine, while providing world-class training in rural and community-based medicine. Tonight's forum with Senator Collins will begin as a conversation, and then the senator will take questions from the audience. As you're supposed to see, we have we have microphones set up in the aisles, and we'll let you know when it's time to start lining up at the microphones. Leading the conversation will be Eitan Hersh, Associate Professor of Political Science at Tufts. Professor Hersh studies American politics with a focus on civic participation and the relationship between electoral rules, political strategies, and the behavior of voters. He is the author of Hacking the Electorate: How Campaigns Perceive Voters, and his writing has appeared in media outlets like the New York Times and the Boston Globe. Eitan is a Tufts graduate and a former Tisch scholar who returned to his alma mater this year after teaching at Yale University, where he received his PhD. Eitan's wife, Julia Hoffman, is also a Tufts alumna, and one of Eitan's very first jobs when he was a high school junior was as a Senate page. In that capacity, Eitan served Senator Collins and her colleagues glasses of water and prepared their lecterns before speeches. Tonight, Eitan is going to serve the senator questions. I want to thank Eitan for moderating tonight's conversation, to thank the senator for joining us. Please welcome Senator Collins and Eitan Hersh.
Welcome to Tufts. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to join you. I want to thank all the Mainers who are out there in the audience, and I love, yes, go Maine. And I love the Maine Track program. That is so important to rural healthcare in my state, so thank you for that. And I'm not taking over, I promise. I also want to acknowledge that we have a state senator from Maine here, Kathy Breen, who is a proud Tufts alum. So.
Okay, well, thank you again. I think the plan now is I'm going to ask a few questions about politics, a few questions about policy, and then relatively quickly we'll move on to welcoming students to ask questions as well. I want to start with politics. As Jean Solomon mentioned, I was a Senate page, and as I just mentioned to you, I was sponsored there by John Chafee, the late senator from Rhode Island, who was another New England Republican. And we are here in Massachusetts with the governor of Massachusetts being yet another New England Republican who has, I think, the highest popularity of any governor in the country. And yet, you're very rare. The pillars of this New England Republican tradition, as I see it, are fiscal responsibility, thoughtful leadership, strong but thoughtful foreign policy, social moderation and liberal policy. And so this brings me to the first question, which is that it's hard to see those values in the Republican Party. With a tax bill and spending bill, not much fiscal restraint. With their Republican treatment of Russia right now, not much courageous foreign policy. And with President Trump in office, not the perfect example of thoughtful leadership. So where does the New England Republican fit in now? And what is the path for New England Republicans to give this region of the country an example?
Well, first of all, let me say that I love Governor Baker. I talk to him very frequently. He called me on Monday to discuss some issues. And during the healthcare debate, I was in constant communication with him, in part because he has such deep background in that area. And also we agreed on a lot of the issues. In fact, I think we probably agree on 90% of issues. And what we have in common, and what was always typical of New England Republicans, was a pragmatic approach to the issues that are before us, a willingness to reach across the aisle, an understanding that compromise was not a dirty word, but rather the way that you got things done, and an ability to see both sides of an issue. I would broaden your question to say that I think both parties are having difficulty right now. I think both parties have been hijacked to some extent by the extremes. And outside groups are demanding 100% compliance with 100% of their views 100% of the time. And I don't think that's healthy for our democracy. The parties have actually been greatly weakened in recent years. That is caused by a number of issues. Some would blame the Supreme Court's decision on campaign finance reform and Citizens United. Others would look to the fact that primaries are increasingly producing people who reflect the more extreme positions in the parties. But I would just throw out a question to the young people in this audience in particular. Are you happy with the choices that you have right now of the Democratic or Republican Party? And see how amazing that is that not a single hand went up. So I think both parties have a lot of rebuilding to do, and we're either going to see a realignment within the parties, or we're going to see new parties springing up, perhaps one that is more centrist.
What do you think about when you talk about young people and their preferences? Tisch College here, which sponsored this event, does a lot of research on youth participation, and one thing that they found is which is consistent with a lot of other research, is this massive age gap now in party affiliation and party affinity, where people under 30, I'd like to make that under 34, but let's young people, we'll define them as under 30. Young people,
So young.
exhibit a 20% gap with, favoring Democrats over Republicans. And so is there a path for the more moderate brands of the Democratic and Republican Party to recapture that audience, particularly on the Republican side where, people are moving away from the Republicans among the younger generation?
Well, I think you see from the survey that I just conducted that there's widespread dissatisfaction with both parties. But on the Republican side, so that I'm not accused of ducking your question in any way, I personally believe that it has been the positions taken on social issues by the many Republican leaders that are driving away younger people who tend to be more tolerant, more inclusive than perhaps older generations were. And that's something that I think is changing in the Republican Party, but I think the perception of the Republican Party on social issues in particular has damaged its standing with younger voters in particular. As the ambassador mentioned, I led the fight with Joe Lieberman, who is, by the way, a conservative Democrat, to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And we were successful in getting over 60 votes, which meant that we got a considerable number of Republicans who supported that effort to repeal that discriminatory law. But I think what people have forgotten is that law was signed by President Clinton. And so societal changes are really evident in the area of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, same-sex marriage. And I think Republicans have been slow to, or slower to evolve on those issues, and that has driven away a lot of young people. But at least in my state, a lot of young people are not enrolling in either party. They're staying as independents.
So you have this great responsibility and honor, I think, in the United States Senate of being demanding compromise and getting your colleagues to talk to one another. Could you just give us some insight into what that's like?
Yes. I could turn around and you would see the arrows in my back because, it's hard to be a moderate these days in Washington because you do get shot at by both sides all the time. And I have a group that I have named the Common Sense Coalition. And I started it in 2013 when government shut down for 16 days. And I was in my office, and I remember it was the first Saturday in October of 2013. And I was watching senators come to the floor, and they alternated a Democrat and then a Republican. And each of them was pointing a finger at the other side, blaming them for the shutdown. And the shutdown caused a lot of harm. It wasted billions of dollars. It cost the economy an astonishing amount. And it really hurt the tourism business in the state of Maine because Acadia National Park, which I'm sure all of you have been to, and those of you who haven't should go, was closed for those 16 days. And that meant the B&Bs, the little inns, the restaurants, the gift shops lost business that they never were able to recoup during the peak of the foliage season. So just to give you a concrete example. And to me, that shutdown represented the ultimate failure to govern. If you can't even keep government going, that really is a plague on both houses, both literally in the Senate and the House and figuratively. So I went to the floor and I gave a speech spontaneously. My staff was all furloughed, so I was all alone in the office, and which is always dangerous because there's no one to talk me out of anything. And So I tapped out a quick speech on the computer, went to the Senate floor, and urged my colleagues to come out of their partisan corners and to work together to reopen government. Now, here's just one really quick, interesting point. The second I got off the Senate floor, my cell phone started ringing, and the first call was from Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska. The second call was from Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat from Minnesota. The third call was from a Republican, Kelly Ayotte from New Hampshire, who's since been defeated. But what do we all have in common here? And honestly, I don't think that's a coincidence. I really don't. And ultimately, we had a group of 14 of us. We met constantly, and we came up with the framework of a plan, and we brought it to our two leaders. At that time, it was Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid. And believe me, and we told them we were going to have a big press conference and reveal our plan. Neither of them liked that idea, I will tell you. And they said, give us some time, and they started talking. They essentially took our plan, tweaked it in some ways, and government reopened. So when government shut down again, we did a similar thing. I reconvened the Common Sense Coalition. The group grew to 26 senators at its high point. We ate Girl Scout cookies and water in my office. And I had a talking stick, which some of you may have read about, which I passed it because trying to control 26 senators who all want to speak at once is no easy task. But again, we came up with a plan for reopening government. And in the last few weeks, we've been working on the immigration issue. We came up with legislation that was co-sponsored by 19 of us on both sides of the aisle. Unfortunately, it got 54 votes, so it fell short of the 60, but it got far more votes than any other plan out there, including the president's, which received only 39 votes. So I tell you this long story because I think there still is a center in the Senate, but it's really tough because you get criticized just mercilessly by the left and the right. And that's what we've got to get away from. We've got to start learning to work together again. And Maine has always had a proud tradition. New England has had a proud tradition of that. And I hope we can get back to that. I'm the only Republican senator left in New England right now. That's not good. You want voices in both caucuses to make the points that benefit our region.
How could a compromise, common sense coalition help to revitalize the Senate's role in advising consent? You know, you were critical of both sides of how they treated the most recent Supreme Court nominees of Merrick Garland on the Republican side and Justice Gorsuch on the Democratic side. It's not inconceivable that President Trump will have an opportunity to nominate a justice, and the Democrats might be in control of the Senate. And I think many of us fear that we're not quite sure what will happen in that situation. Can your coalition save the day, or what's the path?
Of course, we can save the day, right? I worry about the erosion. I'm going to start with the first part of your question. The erosion of power in Washington from the legislative branch to the executive branch. This did not start, but has been worsened under the current president. But it started back, it's been going on for as long as I've been in Washington, and I've been there in the Senate 21 years, so I can't quite believe that. But with each president, I've seen this encroachment of executive power on what should be the role of Congress. I saw it when President Bush issued signing statements when a bill was signed into law. My friends, the president has two choices. He can sign a law or he can veto it. We don't have line item veto at the federal level the way some states do. And I thought signing statements where a president says, I don't like this part of the law, so I'm not going to follow it, I don't think that is constitutional. And then with President Obama, I saw increasing use of executive orders to overturn what Congress wouldn't do or to substitute for what Congress wouldn't do. And with this president, with President Trump, again, I'm seeing more and more executive orders, which really should be the prerogative of Congress to legislate. So I don't think that's good. We have checks and balances that are very important in our system of government, and Congress needs to be more reassertive, regardless of who's in control of Congress and regardless of who the president is. As far as the Supreme Court is concerned, I thought that Merrick Garland, when he was nominated by President Obama, deserved a hearing. I met with him. I was one of only a handful of Republicans to meet with him. And, you know, a president doesn't stop being president just because it's within the last year of his presidency. Now, it would have been one thing if perhaps it had been the last month, then perhaps you could have made that argument, but it wasn't. And I felt that it wasn't fair to not go through the process. I also felt that a lot of Democrats were unfair to Neil Gorsuch, and that it was a reaction to the unfairness towards Merrick Garland. It was a case of two wrongs. And so it's not a good situation. And if the Democrats take control of the Senate, which obviously I hope they do not, it is very likely that we're going to have another Supreme Court vacancy in the next couple of years. I'm not wishing for anyone to resign or die on the Supreme Court. I want to make that very clear. But just look at the age of the Supreme Court members, and it is likely that one will choose to retire or otherwise not be around, and that we will, not by choice, I guess that would be, but it is likely that there will be another. And what I would like to see is for us to go back to depoliticizing the judiciary in general. This is dangerous, and both sides are guilty of applying litmus tests to judicial nominees. We should look at their qualifications. We should look at their experience. We should look at whether they have the proper judicial temperament. We should look for integrity. But we should not say, how are you going to vote on a future case? First of all, they can't answer a question like that. You can ask them, and I do always ask nominees, do you respect precedent? You can ask judicial philosophy. I think that's appropriate. But the politicization of the nomination process for the whole judiciary really concerns me, and both parties are at fault.
Let me ask you, I want to turn it over to students soon. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of questions about policy, and especially these important areas like Affordable Care Act and DACA, which are in the news now. But I want to start by asking one policy question that's on a lot of people's minds right now, and I can speak as a parent of now 3 dropping off my kids through 2 double locked doors to their preschools. The gun violence issue is obviously very pressing, and it's very hard as a parent not to think that mostly on the Republican side, support for status quo measures about assault rifles and high-capacity magazines are really threatening the lives of kids. And at this time when there's a lot of engagement about young people about this, is that your position? And if not, why not?
First of all, I think that it is shameful that Congress has not acted more vigorously on the issue of gun violence. And I have supported several measures over the years, and there is a lot more. None of them get through, including another one of my famous compromises, which again got over 50 votes, but did not prevail. And how anyone can look at the mass shootings that we've seen in this country and not think that we need to do something both in the area of reasonable, sensible gun regulation and mental health services. I don't think you can leave that out. I just don't know how you can reach that conclusion. So let me tell you some things that I think should be done, that I've voted for in the past, but I just cannot imagine what it must be like to be the parent of one of those children. And the Newtown parents gave me an award the year before last for the work that I've done on background checks with Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin. That was a bipartisan initiative. Surely, let's start with issues where it seems to me there ought to be able to be agreement and where we won't be infringing on Second Amendment rights, because we have to accept the fact that this is a constitutional right, but it is not a right that is unlimited. So here's the first thing we should do. We should strengthen background checks so there no longer is the gun show loophole. I would note that in the state of Maine, that at gun shows, the sellers usually do background checks, even though it's not legally required. But I think it should be legally required. The same with online sales of firearms, which are pretty frequent nowadays. The only exception that I can see a justification for are family exchanges. For example, if a father is giving a hunting rifle to his daughter, I don't think you need a background check for that. But we should have strengthened background checks. That's one thing we ought to do. Second, I think we ought to consider increasing the age at which you could buy a semi-automatic rifle or a long gun in general. For handguns, it is 21. For long guns, it's 18. I think we ought to take a look at making that 21. That's an issue that I've just started looking into, and there may be more to the issue, so I need to study it, but that surely sounds reasonable to me. I offered the last time that we looked at this issue, it was after the shootings in Florida at the nightclub, and you may recall that the individual had been on the no-fly list or the selectee list at one point. Well, I authored a bipartisan initiative called No Fly, No Buy. It was based on a very common sense principle, which is if the government has deemed that you are too dangerous to board an airplane, you're too dangerous to buy a gun. And I can't believe that didn't pass unanimously. It got 52 votes, a majority, but not enough. Now, we put in, I want to be really clear on this, a vigorous due process so that if you were mistakenly listed on one of these, on the selectee list or the no-fly list, you got an immediate review by a district court judge, and if you prevailed, your attorney's fees were paid. So we wanted to make sure that we were fair in how we did this because there could be a mistake. But just so you know, on that list, if you combine the two lists, there are fewer than 3,000 Americans who are listed on that list. It's way broader if you take people from other countries. So that's something that I think could have been done also. Mental health services. When you look at this Nicholas Cruz, my goodness, he displayed every red flag that you can imagine that he was going to be a danger to others and to himself. Killing small animals is a classic sign, I'm told, of mental illness in children. And he did not get the help that he obviously needed with such horrible, tragic results. So those are some steps that I think that there ought to be a broad basis for support, and we need to do it right off.
Be nice if your Common Sense Coalition had 60 members.
True.
With that, I think we should open it up to concise and respectful questions from the audience. If you are a student and would like to ask a question, please come down to a microphone. And what I'd like to do is take 2 questions at a time. So we'll do one and then one here. And so just keep them short and sweet.
Thank you, Senator Collins, for coming to speak with us. My question is about the tax cut bill. So at the time, it was reported that in order to get you from a no vote to a yes vote, Mitch McConnell made you a promise that he would move forward with legislation to stabilize insurance premiums. I was wondering if you could give us an update on that promise or whether or not you feel like he's kept it.
Sure. First of all, he did make me a promise on those 2 insurance bills. And I expect that they're going to be part of the Omnibus Appropriations Bill, which is the funding bill for all of government, which will be on the floor in March. And I've been working with both the House and the Senate. But I want to dispel the premise of your question that was a bargain that I made for my vote. That is not the case. I had several priorities for this bill and for the tax bill, and I realized that everyone here may well disagree with my vote on the tax bill, but it really frustrates me that the Boston Globe, and I want to take one shot at the Globe tonight, and I planned to do it on another issue, but this one came up, so you know, what you read isn't always correct. It is correct that Mitch McConnell made a promise to me and that the timeline slipped and that I was very unhappy about that. What is not correct is that I made a deal with him that he would get my vote for the tax bill. I happen to support reducing taxes. I think that this bill had a lot of good provisions in it, such as doubling the standard deduction, which is going to be very helpful for many people in my state. And just to give you an example, a single mom with 1 child in Maine who earns $35,000 a year will now get back, because we doubled the child tax credit and made it refundable, $1,100, whereas before she would have owed the federal government tax money. So to me, that's a very good provision. There are several areas where I had amendments that were accepted, and there were areas that I fought successfully against House provisions using my leverage with the Senate conferees. So here's some provisions that I got in the bill. The Senate bill, as it was first reported, had no deduction for state and local taxes, none. And we got, my amendment was the $10,000 for state and local taxes, and that was in the final version of the bill. For those of you in Massachusetts, I know you probably would have liked it to be a lot higher than 10,000, but that was a lot better than nothing. Second, the Senate bill and the House bill, even worse, would have done away, the House bill would have done away with the deduction for medical expenses that exceeded 10% of your income. This actually was a provision that was included in the Affordable Care Act that I never understood why you would want to limit that deduction. I was able to not only restore that, but to lower the threshold to 7.5%. If you're a middle-income person trying to struggle with the cost of long-term care, you know how important being able to deduct that cost would be. For students, I am the author. One of the first laws that I introduced, first bills that I introduced, because I worked at a college right before my election to the Senate, Hudson University in Bangor. I am the author of the bill that gives a deduction for student loan interest. The House was going to wipe that out. They were also going to wipe out the tax exemption for graduate tuition waivers. I argued for both of those to be kept, for private activity bonds to be kept. Very important for institutions of higher education, for hospitals. I also worked to preserve the historic tax credit, which is really important in older cities like Boston or Lewiston, Maine, or Portland, Maine. The affordable housing credit, another thing that I fought for. So this bill had my fingerprints on it in several areas. I'm sorry to give a long answer. I'll be quicker with the rest, I promise.
Okay, let's take two. Let's try to take two. Go ahead.
Good evening, Senator. Since 2004, the Gulf of Maine has warmed faster than almost any other place on Earth, a fact which could spell disaster for some of Maine's commercial fisheries. And even though you yourself have supported several key pieces of climate change legislation, there is still widespread climate denial in this country, and federal climate policy has stagnated. What is your vision for bipartisan climate action in the Senate?
Okay, let's take one more, and then we'll do both. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that I appreciate, first of all, thank you for being here. I know that I appreciate, and I know many others here appreciate your willingness to buck the president and your party and, vote against some pieces of legislation he supported and some of his nominees as well. And I have a question specifically about one of the nominees, Betsy Devos. I know that in the Senate you voted against her, which I appreciate. In committee, though, you voted to allow her nomination to continue, despite the fact that, if you voted against it, that would have effectively blocked her nomination, at least in essence. Served as a barrier. So my question is, what did you learn about her in the time between that made you change your vote? Or is it just a question of different, what the standard should be? And knowing what you know now, would you have voted differently?
Okay, I'm going to deal with the Betsy Devos, and then I'll go back to your very important climate change, but I think I can deal with this one quickly.
Okay.
And that is, if you go look at the congressional record and the debate, before the vote was held, I announced my intent to oppose Betsy Devos on the Senate floor. It is not true. This is another one of those myths that if Lisa Murkowski and I had voted against her in committee, that it would have killed her nomination. The fact is that committees have three choices. They can report a nominee with approval, with a recommendation that the Senate approve it. They can report with no recommendation, or they can report with a negative recommendation. So even if we had both voted no in committee, she still would have proceeded to the Senate floor. And I announced in committee that I was going to oppose her on the Senate floor. It has always been my practice, and you can go back and look at every cabinet nominee that in any administration, Democrat or Republican, I have always felt that the full Senate should vote on cabinet nominees and that they should not be blocked at the committee level. But I spoke against her in committee. I opposed her because of her lack of familiarity with federal education policy. I felt that she did not even have a good grasp of what the federal role was in education, particularly those for children with special needs. She didn't seem to know that IDEA was a federal law passed in the mid-'70s, and that really troubled me. And so I gave a strong speech, and I opposed her. I said I was going to oppose her in committee, but it is a myth that voting no in committee would have blocked the nomination.
Boston Globe's fault?
And I'm sorry?
Was it the Boston Globe's fault?
The Boston Globe, I'm sure. Do you really want to trigger me on this again? It's the editorial page that truly drives me crazy. But is the Boston Globe here tonight? Tomorrow night. Anyway, I'm not important enough, see, for them to come. Okay, get back seriously. Thank you. Thanks for asking. I really appreciate it. And I would cast the same vote today against her. Foreign committee to get it to the full Senate, against her. Global climate change. So I've talked to fishermen and lobstermen who are plying the waters in Maine, the Casco Bay, for example, and they tell me that they are seeing species that didn't used to be there because of the warming waters, and I am very concerned. You know, southern New England has essentially lost its lobster industry, and while you may say, well, isn't that great for Maine, it really isn't, because the waters are getting warmer and warmer and warmer. So I'm worried about our iconic lobster industry, as well as what this means to low-lying areas. I have spent a lot of time working on this issue. I have actually been to the Arctic, to Barrow, Alaska, and talked to the native Alaskans who tell me that they are seeing insects that they've never seen before, and that the fish runs have changed, and I've seen the telephone poles starting to lean over because the permafrost is melting. I've been to Antarctica for 4 days to meet with scientists there and to talk to them about climate change. So I mentioned those 2 trips because that's not like going to Paris and London, you know. Those are hard trips, and you learn a great deal from it. I introduced a bill a few years ago with Maria Cantwell, a Democrat from Washington State, that was called the CLEAR Act. It was a 39-page bill that essentially would put a fee on certain fossil fuels at the wellhead. And at the same time, the cap and trade bill, which was a monstrosity, by the way. It was over 1,000 pages. It had all sorts of giveaways to the coal industry in order to get it through the House. And it was never taken up by the Senate, despite the fact that the Senate was in Democratic control at the time. I want to make sure that everybody knows that fact. And it was deemed too explosive to bring up. And what was so frustrating was, with the exception of 2 environmental groups, we just could not get the environmental groups to endorse our simpler approach. And it was very discouraging. It was very disheartening. They were very wedded to a bill that was going nowhere. that Harry Reid wasn't going to bring up. So no action occurred. Since then, I have done a lot of work. I have voted for money in the appropriations bill to help other countries with mitigation measures for climate change. I have co-sponsored a bill with Chris Murphy of Connecticut that is aimed at short-acting pollutants like methane, but which are powerful greenhouse gases. Everybody just thinks of CO2, but methane is one as well. And I was successful with legislation with Dick Durbin that aimed at replacing dirty cook stoves in developing countries with cleaner solar stoves. And that was adopted administratively in the Obama administration. And the soot from those cook stoves is responsible for 18% of the soot in our atmosphere. And it comes here too, in addition to affecting the health and well-being of the families directly using it. So I opposed our withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords. I think that was a mistake, but I'm not president.
All right, let's take a couple more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for being here tonight. I want to thank you for your service. My name is Justin. So tonight you've talked a lot about bills that have gotten 54 votes or 53 votes. And unfortunately, as we both know, the United States Senate requires 60 votes to pass most pieces of major legislation. I guess my question is, why does it feel like we keep coming up short? I mean, this has been going on now, it feels like, for the past, since I was a child. It feels like we as a country can't move forward on major issues in the Senate anymore. It either has to be both houses of Congress controlled by one party or controlled by, both parties, and the president has to be of the same party. It just feels like something is breaking and we're getting past a point where there's nothing to be done anymore.
Thank you.
I have a very similar question, actually. So my name's Ian. I'm a graduate student at the Fletcher School. And I think even though we're in a very polarized country, most Americans care about the policy process as much as the policy outcome. So they want our legislative process to be open, transparent, above board, and they want our representatives to do their due diligence and their thoughtful consideration before they vote. So my question is about the reconciliation process and the Byrd Rule. That wasn't designed for big sweeping legislation for infrastructure, tax reform, healthcare. It was designed for small budget adjustments, but it's been weaponized and abused by both Democrats and Republicans many times over many years. So it's problematic because you skip committee hearings, you skip CBO scores, there's no room for amendment or debate, and you end up with handwritten laws that people vote on without possibly having time to read the whole thing. So three-part question. The first part question is, why do we use reconciliation to run away from regular and thoughtful order? The second part is, how is it anything other than indefensible to jump through so many hoops and cut so many corners to make laws that affect 400 million Americans? And then the last question is there a movement in Washington to get away from using reconciliation again and again, something like the Common Sense Coalition, not just on a one-time basis, but on a permanent basis to fix what's been broken since all of us were kids?
So the Common Sense Coalition has talked about tackling the budget process. We haven't done so yet, and because we've been working on the immigration issue and keeping government open, but we have talked about that, whether we should take on that issue. Then what happened is in the latest government funding bill that passed that adjusted the budget caps, there is a special committee, a select committee that's been created on the budget and appropriations process. And I believe that that committee is going to look at reconciliation, is going to look at the Byrd Rule, is going to look at process issues. When I first started in the Senate, we used to bring each individual appropriations bill to the Senate floor. It was fully debated, it was amended, it was passed, it then went to the House. Actually, the other way around, they started in the House. And then we went to conference. That was way better. I hate that we bundle these huge spending bills together in order to keep government funding. It's particularly bad for people who are not on the Appropriations Committee because they don't have the ability to shape the bill the way that those of us who are on the committee at least do. So I do think those issues are all going to be looked at. I'm a little worried what may come out of this because I don't want to see the 60-vote threshold for legislation to be removed. The Senate is not the House. The House was designed to be a place of majoritarian rule. The Senate was not. There's the probably apocryphal story about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and the Senate's supposed to be the place where the water of the tea cools and the passions of the day are allowed to simmer down. So we are designed to be a more deliberative body. That's one reason we have 6-year terms and they don't all expire at the same time. But that 60-vote threshold for legislation, I think, is important because it means in almost every case, unless you have a really lopsided Senate, that you have to have support from both parties. When you go to reconciliation, you don't. And it isn't what reconciliation was originally designed for. It was designed to give spending instructions to specific committees to come back. And so my hope is that this committee will come up with reforms that will address both of your concerns. We'll see.
Let me just thank everyone. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to answer all the questions, but I want to thank you, Senator. Even for the students and faculty here who don't agree on everything you ever stood for, I think that your dignified spirit, focus on compromise, respectful leadership is really a very hopeful symbol for our country, and we really thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So before we close the program, we have a little gift for the senator. We heard about a month ago in your office during the talks, the bipartisan talks to prevent the shutdown, the government shutdown, with several legislators in your office, that the discussions got very animated, and as the talking stick was passed, your glass elephant figurine was accidentally broken by a rogue talking stick that was passed from one senator to another. So, although one elephant lost its life for the sake of bipartisanship, we hope that this elephant will have a much longer life, will witness many fruitful conversations under your guidance, and will lead to many fruitful common sense solutions to our problems. We've nicknamed this Jumbo.
I know this story.
In honor of the Tufts mascot. We've also filled Jumbo with your favorite candies, in case you need to resort to bribery in those deliberations. And we just want to thank you for being here. I think I want to echo what Eitan said, but especially given the state of our politics today, I think your voice has probably never been more needed, especially in your party, and I'm sure my Republican friends would agree with that. And I appreciate your coming and sharing your perspectives with us. It was really terrific, and I thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience.